With Tua, nobody bothered to tell us that he was out until 5 minutes before he was due to be on. That's what pissed me off, frankly. Yeah. If you're going to pull the plug on this guy, then you better do it, at a reasonable time so we're not caught in a position where you got the haters online thinking that Tua was retaliating against us in some way because, God forbid, every word out of our mouths over the past 3 years hasn't been complete and total, unequivocal praise of Tua Tagovailoa. We've actually been candid in our assessments of areas where his game needs to improve.
Ain't that the truth? Seriously, like Mike Florio just said, the Twitterati is nuts. Unless you have 100% adulation, they come for you. Since this story broke yesterday, I've had many people tweet me.
See, it's not Tua's fault that he got canceled.
I just have to shake my head. Do you remember, I may be dating myself at this point, but do you remember a guy named Paul Harvey? I used to listen to Paul Harvey's stories on the way home from work or, sometimes in between practice, and I would just love the way this guy told the story. And he always concluded his afternoon story with this one-liner. And now, you know the rest of the story. Loved it. Perfect closing. Now here we are a week after the Super Bowl, and we're starting to find out the rest of the story as to why Tua Tagovailoa canceled his interviews with the Pat McAfee show and the guys from Pro Football Talk, Mike Florio and Chris Sims. And as Paul Harvey said, now we're about to find out the rest of the story. And it ain't good. Mike Florio did a call-in on the Joe Rose show, and he spoke about what happened. Florio said it wasn't Tua specifically himself that was the reason for the cancellation. He said that Tua was ready to do the show and go forward with the interview. But it was Tua's new agency, Athletes First, that pulled the plug and canceled everything.
Friday, you're going to have Tua Tagovailoa come on your show. I know we talked about it. I heard a bunch of what happened. What was the reason you ended up not getting him?
Well, it had nothing to do with Tua. He did not turn us down. He did not fail to show up. It's a bigger story. It's a broader story, and it's something that I'm trying to work through behind the scenes. It has more to do with the agency that represents him now than it does him. I'll just leave it at that. But it wasn't like he said, I see these two buttholes, I'm not going to be on their show. I mean, we were locked in, it was set, it was good to go, but apparently someone from his agency became aware that he was going to be on, and it has more to do with one of the specific agents and something that was said about one of the agents at one point that apparently has become an issue, and that's something I'm trying to work through, and I prefer to work through it behind the scenes, but I also want to be transparent about what happened. This wasn't Tua. This was the fact, and if he hadn't changed agents from Lee Steinberg to the firm he's currently with, he would have been on. This is more about agent retaliation for something that was said about him on one of our shows.
For the Tua can do no wrong people, that explanation is all that matters. Story's over, case closed, move on. For them, they can stop watching right now. For the rest of us, let's continue. It seems that Athletes First reps CJ Stroud and Justin Fields as well, and they canceled some of their interviews at Super Bowl week 2. Florio said that the people at Athletes First didn't like some of the conversations they've had in the past about one of their agents, so they decided to just, put the nix on the whole interview thing. So I have a question. Did they not know beforehand that Tua Tagovailoa was going to appear with Chris Sims and Mike Florio and with Pat McAfee? Surely they did. Florio said, and I quote, "We're locked in. We're all set. We're good to go." And then the interview got canceled. Did Tua's new agent only find out 2 minutes before he was scheduled to go on the air that he's sitting down with Mike Florio and Chris Sims? I doubt it. Tua even had a major sponsor locked in. And as I mentioned in a previous video, that's a problem. But the Tua posse on Twitter attacked. They said marketing doesn't matter, but it really does. It's a real issue.
I guess the only thing I would say back and said this last week, or earlier this week, but he was working for Subway. Didn't Subway want him to go on as many big platforms as possible?
Well, that's the other side of it, and that's part of what I've tried to explain to folks behind the scenes.
I don't expect you guys watching to understand sports agency representation and sponsorship sales, but this is kind of a big deal. It was Joe Rose who brought it up in his interview, And even Mike Florio is trying to tamp it down. But the Tua Army doesn't care, which is fine. But I've been represented by sports agents before, and I also do a lot of work with sponsors. This isn't something that just gets swept under the rug and forgotten about. You don't simply respond to a sponsor and say, hey, it didn't work out. Someone is surely going to have to answer for this debacle. But what really makes this story kind of amazing to me is that Florio kind of hinted that all of this cancellation stuff had to do with DeShaun Watson. Athletes First is the same representation agency that DeShaun Watson has. So let me get this straight. The agency that reps Tug Me Harder happy ending DeShaun Watson is upset and ticked off because of how DeShaun Watson was handled, and then they used Tua as a pawn for retaliation. DeShaun Watson. DeShaun friggin' Watson, the same guy that Brian Flores wanted to bring in to replace Tua, is who Tua is being used to protect. Wait a second. Are y'all okay with this? Seriously? You're okay with Tua being used to retaliate for DeShaun Watson? That's amazing. So let's look at like 4 or 5 facts here. And none of these facts are in dispute. Number 1, Tua was booked and confirmed on several interviews throughout Super Bowl week, including on the Pat McAfee show and with the guys from Pro Football Talk. Go ahead, nod at home. You agree. Yep. Undisputable. Number 2, Tua went to Radio Row at the Super Bowl with the intention of fulfilling his obligations with the interviews he had committed to. Go ahead, nod your head, that's true. Number 3, Tua then appears at several interviews, mostly pitching Subway, kind of softball interviews, gets one that's really off color, but he does go through a number of interviews. We nodding our head? Yep, nod your head. Number 4, 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes before meeting with Florio and Sims, somehow the whole thing gets called off. Someone calls Tua and says, nah, dog, that ain't happening. Them. We ain't doing it. Don't go on that show. They was dissing Mr. Happy Ending and you with us now. And then, from what we understand, Tua said, word to your mother's uncle. Yeah. And he said, I'm out, and broke his commitment. Now, obviously, I had some fun with that. Tua, I don't think would ever talk that way. But he was booked at the interviews that he then canceled. He was committed, and then he canceled. You can't say it was the agency that canceled because Tua is his own man. Tua doesn't get bossed around. If he wanted to do the interviews, he could have said, I'm doing the interviews. Are we at least in agreement there, or do you think that Tua is a robot and has to do exactly what his agent says? And I have a couple other things that I know we all agree on. I have no doubt, none whatsoever, that Tua Tagovailoa is a fine, upstanding young man and comes from a fine family. I know a little bit about the Hawaiian and Samoan culture, and I know they are stand-up, proud people. Can we all agree on that? The Samoans and Hawaiians are proud, strong people. Tua is a great guy, comes from a great family. Can we all nod in approval? There's no dispute there? Okay. Then someone please explain to me how Tua Tagovailoa has allowed himself to be associated with DeShaun Watson. And then somebody tell me, how did Tua Tagovailoa allow himself to become a retaliatory pawn, protecting and standing up for DeShaun Watson? Somebody needs to make it make sense. It makes absolutely no sense. That's something I think we all can agree on as well. I understand that Tua wants the big money deal. Presumably, that's why he changed agents so he can get that $200 million he's seeking. I also understand that somehow this agency group bamboozled the Cleveland Browns into giving DeShaun Watson $240 million guaranteed. But I also know, and I also feel quite confident that you feel the same way, Tua is not the same kind of man. Many of you think I've become a hater, and nothing could be further from the truth. I haven't. I really haven't. I'm just seeing things going on that are so unlike Tua Tagovailoa. And I keep trying to bring them to light and people get pissed off, but this isn't Tua. That's the problem I'm having. I'm watching this unfold and I'm saying, wow, Tua is getting some really, really, really bad advice. I hope Tua gets healthy. I hope Tua gets a big, huge, fat bag of cash. But to Tua and his family, and I know some have watched some of my videos, I have something to ask of you. Shouldn't we seek the kingdom of God first? Not athletes first, the kingdom of God first. Should Tua be used as a retaliatory pawn protecting DeShaun Watson? And most importantly, at what price does getting the bag come? Some of you may not know this passage from the Bible, and some of you may not care, but I'm pretty sure that Tua knows this passage and his family knows this passage. For what will it profit a man if he gains the entire world but loses his soul? Some of you may laugh at this. Some of you may try to come after me for even saying it. But for those of you truly listening, I think you understand where I'm coming from. What drew me to Tua Tagovailoa was a fine, young, upstanding young man. His ability to play football was just an added benefit. I looked at him, and still do, as a leader of men. And I looked at his potential, and still do, as a fisher of men. I never, ever, ever could have imagined that Tua Tagovailoa, with his faith and upbringing, could align himself with people that would allow him to be used as a retaliatory pawn for a sexual abuser like DeShaun Watson. I love the kid. I absolutely love the way Tua plays. I love what he means. I love what he stands for. I love how he carries himself. But I've become quite disappointed over the last couple of months. Don't hate on the kid. I've just been disappointed. And I know, despite the Tua.That saying otherwise, I'm not alone. I just hope that something happens really soon, some sort of catalyst, some sort of trigger that just breaks all this stuff. I feel like he's under attack. I feel like Tua is being given really bad advice, and people are doing it just because they want a piece of the pie. I hope it changes real soon. You guys can attack me all you want. I love the kid, but something's got to change. Talk to you soon. Fins up.
Is anybody catching on to this Barry guy?